Olivia stood in front of the full-length mirror, adjusting the straps of her navy silk dress. The rich, deep hue of the fabric caught the light from the chandeliers above, casting a soft, reflective glow that danced across the surface. She studied, her reflection smoothing the material over her curves. For a moment she admired the dress's elegance, but the joy she used to feel in these moments, preparing for an anniversary dinner with Ian, had long since faded. The woman who looked back at her seemed distant, unfamiliar, as if the reflection belonged to someone else entirely. Her gaze shifted away from the mirror, and she adjusted the sapphire necklace around her neck. A flicker of her old self, the Olivia who once felt confident in her marriage, surfaced for a fleeting moment. She remembered when she and Ian had first met, years ago, both of them driven by ambition and hunger for success. They had worked together, hand in hand, climbing the social and professional ladders, confident that their partnership was unbreakable. But now, as she prepared for this milestone, the 10th anniversary of their marriage, she couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in the pit of her stomach that something was wrong. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a moment to reflect on all they had accomplished together. The top-floor restaurant, with its panoramic view of the glittering city below, was a symbol of their success. Ian's business had grown beyond measure, and Olivia's consulting firm was a powerhouse, known for its sharp intellect and success. They were the city's golden couple, admired by friends, colleagues, and strangers alike. Their life seemed perfect on the outside, a dream many would envy. But Olivia knew better. She had begun to see the cracks that had formed in the facade of their marriage. As she made her way toward the table where Ian sat, her heels clicking against the marble floor, she took a deep breath and tried to steady her racing heart. Ian looked handsome as usual, his tailored suit sharp and impeccable, his dark hair neatly combed. He had always been someone who exuded confidence, his presence commanding the attention of any room he entered. The familiar scent of his woody cologne, which once brought her comfort, now felt suffocating. There was a distance in his eyes that made Olivia's chest tighten. The warmth in his smile had disappeared, replaced by something colder, something she couldn't quite place. "Happy anniversary, Liv," Ian said, raising his glass of Cabernet with a casual smile. His voice was smooth, but there was a faint strain beneath it, like a wire pulled too tight. Olivia mirrored him, her smile thin and tight, unsure if she could keep up the appearance of everything being okay. She clinked her glass with his, the sound of the glasses ringing out in the otherwise hushed atmosphere of the restaurant. The wine should have been comforting, soothing her nerves, but instead a sharp unease coiled in her chest. She couldn't put her finger on it, but something was off. Ian's eyes flicked toward her briefly, then back to his plate as he cut into his steak. Olivia studied him, trying to find the man she had fallen in love with, the man who had once stayed up all night helping her pitch her first client, who had toasted every milestone with her. But now, as she watched him, he felt like a stranger. The way his eyes darted to his phone during the conversation, the way he fidgeted with his napkin, his sighs that were too heavy to be casual. It was like he was somewhere else, far from her, disconnected. The connection that had once been so strong seemed to have unraveled without her realizing it. Her mind began to race, turning over the events of the past few months. Late-night calls, which he brushed off as client crises, vague answers about his business dealings, his growing irritability when she asked about his day. He had become a master of evasion, dodging her questions and slipping away from their once happy conversations. Even when they were together, he seemed preoccupied, distracted by something she couldn't see. Olivia wanted to push those thoughts aside, to ignore the growing discontent that had been eating at her. But she couldn't anymore. She set her fork down, the food on her plate untouched. She tried to smile, forcing herself to ask, "How's work? Everything going smoothly?" Ian glanced up for a brief moment, his gaze flicking from his plate to her face. There it was again, the shadow in his eyes. "It's good. You know how it is. Busy," he replied. But Olivia could see the flicker of impatience in his eyes as he returned to his steak, his fingers drumming lightly on the table as he chewed. She could feel the silence stretching between them, the conversation feeling more like an obligation than a genuine exchange. "I'm exhausted," Olivia admitted, her voice breaking the uncomfortable silence. "The Peterson deal is brutal. It feels like everything is falling apart at once." She tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. Ian gave a distracted nod, but his attention was already on his phone again. His lips pressed into a thin line, and he didn't respond. The unease in Olivia's chest grew sharper. Her mind raced, wondering what had happened to the man she once knew, the man who had shared her dreams and ambitions, who had been her partner through it all. She took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm. It was just the stress. It had to be. But a part of her feared it was something more, something darker that she couldn't quite comprehend. As she gazed across the table at Ian, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Forever. And deep down, she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Olivia stood frozen, her mind racing as Sarah's urgent whisper echoed in her ears. "I saw your husband. He put something in your wine while you were gone." The words didn't register immediately. The bathroom seemed to spin around her as she processed the information. This couldn't be real, could it? Ian, her husband, the man she had shared her life with for a decade, was capable of such a betrayal? It was a thought too monstrous to entertain, yet Sarah's eyes held nothing but sincerity. There was no deceit, no falsehood in the young woman's gaze, only raw, unfiltered concern. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. Olivia couldn't breathe. The walls of the restroom, once comforting in their sterile simplicity, now felt suffocating. She had trusted Ian with everything: her love, her ambition, her future. They had built a life together, one that seemed perfect from the outside, but now everything she thought she knew was crumbling before her eyes. Sarah, the waitress who had caught a glimpse of the exchange, had risked everything to warn Olivia. And yet, the idea that Ian, the man she had stood by through thick and thin, could stoop so low as to try to poison her, poison his wife, was inconceivable. Olivia felt as though the floor had fallen out from under her. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the sink, desperately trying to steady herself. Was it possible? Was this a misunderstanding? Or had Ian really gone to such extremes, desperate enough to harm her to cover up whatever mess he had gotten himself into? Her mind raced, sifting through every moment of their relationship. The late-night phone calls, the cryptic answers, the growing distance between them, the sudden secrecy. The cracks in their perfect life had been there for months, but she had refused to acknowledge them, convincing herself it was all just stress. Work had been demanding, and Ian's investment business had been booming, or so he claimed. But now, as Sarah's words took root, Olivia couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her gut. Had she been blind to the truth all along? The image of Ian's distracted glances, his quick, dismissive answers, his growing irritation when she asked questions about his business, flashed in her mind. He had changed. The man who had once been her partner, her confidant, had turned into a stranger. And now, Sarah's words made everything seem so much darker. Olivia's stomach churned as the weight of it all pressed down on her. How could she have missed this? How could she have missed the warning signs of the man she had loved, the man she thought she knew better than anyone? Are you sure? Olivia's voice barely rose above a whisper, her throat tight with a mixture of disbelief and fear. She took a step toward Sarah, her heart racing as she searched the young woman's face for any hint of doubt. But there was none. Sarah nodded, her braid swaying with the movement, her expression serious and urgent. I was right there, maybe 10 feet away. He didn't think anyone was watching. I've seen him before. He's always so calculated, but I had to tell. You! Sarah's voice trembled with an intensity that made Olivia's blood run cold. Just, please be careful. As quickly as she had arrived, Sarah was gone, slipping out of the restroom as quietly as she had entered, leaving Olivia standing alone in the silence. The words Sarah had spoken continued to swirl in Olivia's mind, each one sharper than the last. Olivia stood motionless for a long moment, her mind unable to process the enormity of what Sarah had just revealed. The idea that Ian could betray her in such a horrific way was too much to comprehend. It felt surreal, like a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. Ian, her Ian, was capable of this, was capable of poisoning her for the sake of his own survival? The thought seemed impossible, but as she stood there, the reality of the situation began to settle in. She had known for a while that something was wrong. She had felt the growing distance between them, the way Ian had become more and more elusive, more closed off. But she had always convinced herself that it was just stress, that they were both simply caught up in their respective careers. The truth, however, was more sinister than she could have imagined. What had pushed Ian to this point? Was it his failing business, the mounting pressure from creditors? Olivia tried to rationalize, but nothing made sense. Ian had always been driven, but this? It was something else, something darker. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had to act. She couldn't confront him yet, not without proof. Olivia couldn't allow herself to be blindsided, to fall victim to whatever Ian was planning. Sarah had warned her, but now Olivia needed to take control. She had to know the truth, to be sure. She couldn't let Ian's web of lies consume her any longer. With her mind made up, Olivia turned toward the restroom door. The hum of the restaurant seemed distant now. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the soft jazz playing in the background. All of it faded into the background as Olivia's focus narrowed. She had to return to their table. She had to watch Ian, observe him closely. If Sarah was right, she needed to be ready. As she stepped back into the bustling dining room, her heart raced. She glanced over at Ian, who was still absorbed in his phone, his movements restless. Olivia moved toward him with purpose, the weight of the evening's revelation bearing down on her. She was no longer the woman who trusted blindly, who believed in the picture-perfect life she had built with Ian. She was a woman on the edge of a truth that would shatter everything. The evening had changed. Everything had changed. Olivia's pulse was racing as she re-entered the restaurant. The soft hum of conversations, the clink of silverware, and the smooth jazz playing in the background all felt distant, as if she were in a different world. Her mind was consumed by the shocking words Sarah had whispered to her just moments before. Ian, her husband, the man she had spent 10 years with, had tried to poison her. The idea seemed ludicrous, yet every fiber of her being screamed that it was true. The wine glass, so carefully placed in front of her on the table, suddenly felt like an enemy. She glanced at Ian, still hunched over his phone, tapping away at the screen with an intensity that made her heart sink. He hadn't even noticed she was back. His fingers were quick, and his jaw was tense, as though he was losing himself in whatever business dealings were consuming him. His face was hard, unreadable, and Olivia couldn't help but notice how his eyes avoided hers, glancing over her shoulder as if to avoid making any real connection. His lack of attention to her wasn't new, but now, in light of what Sarah had revealed, it was chilling. Olivia's mind was reeling. She had to act, and fast. She couldn't confront him without more proof. Sarah's word alone wasn't enough. She had no idea what Ian was planning, but she needed to find out. As she took her seat across from him, her breath shallow, her eyes kept flicking to the 2 glasses of wine on the table. Ian's was still untouched, his half-smile pasted on his face as he looked up from his phone. She forced herself to smile back, though the tension in her chest made it feel as though her muscles were tied in knots. "Miss me?" she asked, her voice light and casual. Though inside, her emotions were anything but. She could feel her heart thudding in her chest, each beat a reminder of the lies she was living. Ian looked up at her, his gaze sharp and quick. For a moment, Olivia saw a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or suspicion. But it disappeared, almost as quickly as it had appeared. His smile was thin, polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Always," he said, his voice flat, before returning to his phone. There was a nervousness in his movements, a restlessness that she had never noticed before. Olivia forced herself to focus. She couldn't afford to lose her composure now. Sarah's warning echoed in her ears. He had slipped something into her. Drink, and she had to be careful. But how could she be sure? The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was hiding something dark behind those cold eyes. She needed to find out what. As Ian shifted in his seat, distracted by his phone again, Olivia turned her attention to the glasses of wine on the table. Her glass, now sitting untouched on her right, seemed innocent enough, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that it was meant for her downfall. Her eyes moved to Ian's glass. It looked the same, rich, dark, the same color as hers. But was it? The sudden fear that had been growing in her chest now tightened into something sharper, something more tangible. She couldn't confront him yet. She had to be sure. She had to test him, to see if he would reveal himself. Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. "This wine's too good to waste," she said, her voice lighter than she felt. She wasn't sure if She was trying to convince herself or him. In a quick, fluid motion that she hoped was undetected, she nudged Ian's glass toward her side of the table, switching it with her own. The swap was swift and seamless, hidden by the flicker of candlelight and the slight angle of her body. Ian didn't notice. He was too absorbed in whatever was on his phone. Olivia could feel her breath catch in her throat as she carefully picked up the glass that now held Ian's wine. It was his wine, but it would be her test. If Sarah had been wrong, nothing would happen. But if Sarah was right, her stomach churned at the thought. The room felt impossibly quiet in that moment, even though the restaurant was full. Olivia held the glass in her hand, her fingers trembling slightly, but she steeled herself. She had to do this. She had to know. 10 more years? Olivia asked, raising the glass with a smile, though her heart was thumping loudly in her chest. Her eyes met Ian's, searching for any hint of hesitation, any sign that he was aware of what had just happened. She held her breath as Ian looked up, startled for a moment before offering a thin smile in return. 10 more, he echoed, the words flat, the sincerity in them unmistakably absent. He lifted the glass, his fingers brushing against the rim, and drank deeply. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she watched him. His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his face calm, almost too calm. His eyes met hers as he wiped his mouth with a napkin, then leaned back in his chair, looking relaxed. Too relaxed. Olivia's mind was racing. Had he known? Was this a performance, a calculated move to maintain control? His nonchalance only made the tension more unbearable. Her heart hammered in her chest as she forced herself to keep her expression neutral. Nothing could show on her face. Not yet. She needed more time to watch him, to see if he would slip, if something would reveal his guilt. So, she began, trying to sound casual, though her voice wavered slightly. How's that big deal you mentioned? The one keeping you up all night? She watched him carefully, noticing the slightest shift in his expression. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, and his fingers drummed restlessly on the table. It was a nervous tick she had seen in him before, one she had ignored in the past, but now it sent a chill down her spine. It's complicated, he said, his voice becoming more clipped. High stakes, big players. You know how it is. He glanced at his watch, a quick, nervous motion that betrayed his calm demeanor. His eyes darted back to her glass, and for the first time that evening, Olivia saw something that made her blood run cold. He was looking at her glass, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. You're not drinking much, he noted, his tone too casual, too indifferent. Olivia smiled, her lips tight. Saving it, she said, her voice a shield. Want to savor it? She raised the glass to her lips, taking a small sip, her mind now focused solely on Ian. Her pulse was rapid as she watched his every move, every flicker of emotion, every word. She needed to know the truth, and somehow she would. The rest of the evening stretched on in slow motion, each passing minute more agonizing than the last. She couldn't stop watching Ian, trying to decipher his every glance, every shift of his body. But as the night wore on and nothing seemed amiss, the dread in her chest grew heavier. Had Sarah been wrong? Or was Ian's calm the result of a man who had already won? The calmness in Ian's demeanor was starting to crack, and Olivia could feel the pressure mounting in her chest. She had switched the glasses. Hers now contained Ian's wine, and his was in front of her. She'd watched him take that first sip. Her heart had pounded as he drank without hesitation, as if everything were normal, as if nothing had changed. But deep down, Olivia knew. She wasn't sure what she had expected. Perhaps a twitch, a subtle sign that he knew she had switched. The glasses. But Ian didn't react. He continued his calm facade, as if he had orchestrated everything. He didn't flinch, didn't question her. He drank deeply, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and sat back in his chair with a relaxed ease that made Olivia's stomach churn. Olivia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, but the unease was getting worse, knotting her insides. She forced a smile, even though her chest felt tight. "So, how's that big deal you mentioned?" she asked, her voice sounding far more casual than she felt. She needed to keep him talking. She needed to observe more, to see if there was any change in him, anything that could give her a clue about what he had planned. Ian's eyes flickered briefly toward her before returning to his phone. "It's complicated," he said, his voice tight, his words clipped. There was a faint edge of defensiveness in his tone now. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, tapping the surface in an unconscious rhythm. The tapping was quick and repetitive, an unsettling sign, a nervous tick that she hadn't noticed before. Ian, who had once been so in control, was now showing cracks in his facade. Her thoughts raced. She couldn't ignore the fact that something was definitely off. His usual calmness, the way he had always exuded confidence and control, was slipping. He was no longer the man she had married, the man who had shared her triumphs, celebrated her successes. Now he was someone else entirely, a stranger who was barely holding his mask together. Olivia's mind flickered to their past. Those early days when Ian's ambition had thrilled her. He had been driven, a force to be reckoned with. Their relationship had been built on a foundation of shared success, a mutual drive to win. But lately, that ambition had taken on a darker tone. His late-night calls, his constant evasiveness, his failure to include her in his world, it all pointed to one thing. Ian was hiding something. But what? What could possibly drive him to do something so drastic, so unforgivable? "Are you feeling okay?" Ian asked suddenly, his eyes flicking up from his phone to look at her. His gaze lingered on her face for a moment, studying her, but there was no real concern in his eyes. Only the barest hint of something else, something harder. "You look pale," Olivia nodded, forcing a weak smile. "Just the headache," she lied, her voice a little too tight. "I'm fine, just tired." But inside, her head was spinning. Ian was so calm, so collected, and yet she could feel his nervous energy beneath the surface, the subtle signs of his unraveling. Every small gesture, every glance at his phone, every twitch of his fingers on the table, it was all adding up. This wasn't the man she had married. This wasn't the person who had once shared her dreams and aspirations. Something had changed as she sipped from the glass. She couldn't help but wonder, was Sarah wrong? Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe she was reading too much into it. But the doubt in her mind only deepened with every passing second. She glanced at the wine glass in front of her, now half empty. The sip she had taken was bitter, almost metallic in taste, though she couldn't be sure if that was just her nerves or if something was indeed wrong with it. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was all part of Ian's plan, whatever it was. The evening dragged on, but Olivia couldn't focus on anything else. She felt like she was living in two worlds, one where she was sitting at the table with Ian, trying to keep up the appearance of normalcy, and another where everything was coming apart, where every action he took felt like a clue, every movement a piece of the puzzle she was desperate to solve. Then, without warning, Ian suddenly coughed, a dry, harsh cough that made Olivia's heart leap in her chest. He cleared his throat, then coughed again. It was a small sound, but it struck her like a thunderclap. She leaned forward, her instincts kicking in. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice sharp, her concern genuine despite the dread that was slowly sinking in. Ian rubbed his eyes and mumbled, "Fine, just tired." But there was a sheen of sweat forming on his forehead now, his face pale, the faintest tremor in his hand as he reached for his wine glass again. The glass shook slightly as he lifted it to his lips, his fingers unsteady. The calm exterior he had been trying to maintain cracking beneath the strain. The unease in Olivia's chest blossomed into full-blown panic. Something was terribly wrong. Ian wasn't just tired, he was sick, and the signs were all too familiar. She had seen it before, his previous bouts of exhaustion, his mood swings, his irritability when something wasn't going right in his business. But this felt different. This was something worse. "Ian?" Olivia said again, her voice sharp, panic creeping into her tone. She reached out, her hand hovering over his, but before she could touch him, he slumped in his chair, his face contorted, in pain. The glass of wine slipped from his fingers and fell to the table with a soft clink, the wine spilling over the white tablecloth, a vivid, horrifying stain spreading across the fabric. "Ian!" Olivia shouted, jumping out of her seat. Her heart raced, a cold chill running down her spine. He groaned, his hand clutching his head as he leaned forward, his body sagging. His breath was shallow, erratic. Olivia's mind raced as she stood over him, helpless. "Call 911!" she shouted to the nearest waiter, her voice frantic. The room seemed to freeze, everything slowing down around her. The chatter, the clinking of glasses, the faint music. All of it became distant white noise as she focused on Ian, now barely conscious in front of her. His face was pale, his eyes fluttering open and closed, and Olivia's heart dropped into her stomach. What had happened? What had Ian done? The truth, the awful truth, hit her like a freight train. Ian had poisoned her. Had he really meant to kill her? Was it a plan gone wrong? Or had his desperation, his need for control, driven him to this? "Stay with me, Ian," Olivia pleaded, her voice trembling. She grabbed his shoulders, trying to keep him upright, but his body was unresponsive, limp in her arms. She felt a terrifying weight settle over her. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was an attempt on her life. In that moment, the reality of what Ian had done began to sink in, and Olivia realized the full extent of the danger she was in. She wasn't just fighting for her marriage anymore. She was fighting for her survival. The sterile, fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room seemed to magnify the cold emptiness Olivia felt in her chest. Ian's collapse at the restaurant had thrown her into a whirlwind, and now, as she waited for news, her world felt suspended between two realities. One reality was where she still saw Ian as the man she had once loved, the man who had stood by her through years of triumphs and challenges. The other reality was one where Ian was a stranger, a man who had been hiding his true intentions, someone capable of poisoning her in order to escape the financial wreckage he had created. The man she had known for 10 years was gone, replaced by a betrayer, and she was left with nothing but confusion and a growing sense of disbelief. She sat in the waiting room, her navy silk dress still stained with wine, the fabric a constant reminder of the horrifying evening. Olivia's hands were clenched tightly in her lap, her fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. Her phone sat silent beside her, but she didn't reach for it. There was no one to call, not really. Who could she turn to in this moment? Her colleagues, who had admired her perfect marriage and successful business, would never understand the gravity of what had just happened. Her parents, long retired to Florida, were oblivious to the cracks that had begun to appear in her life. Olivia had built her world around Ian, believing in the foundation they had created together, and now it was crumbling, piece by piece. Olivia's mind replayed the events of the evening like a broken record, each scene more surreal than the last. Sarah's warning, Ian's sudden collapse, the way he had acted so calm, so calculated, as though everything was a game. But Sarah had been right. Ian had slipped something into her wine. He had tried to harm her, to poison her, and she had narrowly escaped. Just then, the hospital doors swung open, and Dr. Patel entered the waiting room. Her white coat was crisp, her expression professional but weary, as if she had been through a long shift. She walked directly toward Olivia, and the moment their eyes met, Olivia's heart clenched. She knew the news wasn't good. "Ms. Harper?" Dr. Patel's voice was steady but gentle. "Your husband is stable for now, but we've administered a sedative to him. He ingested a high dose of diazepam, which is a controlled substance. It's not something you'd find over the counter, and it's far above therapeutic levels. We've sedated him and are monitoring him closely." Olivia felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Diazepam. The drug Ian had used was meant for her, she realized. Her body went cold as the truth hit her like a physical blow. Ian had intentionally drugged her. He had meant to harm her, to disable her. But by some twist of fate, the plan had failed. She had swapped the glasses, and Ian had consumed the poisoned wine instead. Dr. Patel continued, her voice lowering as she spoke. "He's under observation, and we're running more tests to ensure there are no lasting effects. The good news is that he's lucky to be alive. But I need to know how this substance got into his system. Did you witness anything unusual?" Olivia's throat tightened. How could she explain what had happened without sounding paranoid, without sounding like she was accusing her husband of trying to kill her? She had seen it all. The exchange of glasses, Ian's calm demeanor as he drank, the way he had collapsed. So suddenly. But how could she put this into words? She forced herself to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "I swapped our glasses," she confessed, the weight of her words settling heavily in the air. "I didn't believe it when someone warned me that he'd put something in my drink. I thought it was a mistake, but I switched them to be safe." Her hands shook as she spoke, and she could feel the enormity of her actions crashing down on her. Dr. Patel's eyes softened, but her tone remained professional. That explains it. The dose was far above therapeutic levels. If you hadn't switched the glasses, the situation would have been far worse. We'll need to report this to the authorities. But you did the right thing by acting quickly. Olivia's mind was spinning, the events of the night overwhelming her. The fact that Ian had planned this, that he had thought so little of her, that he had been willing to destroy her for the sake of his own survival, was something she still couldn't fully comprehend. She had spent a decade building a life with this man, a life that now seemed like a fragile house of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest touch. Dr. Patel handed Olivia a clipboard. "We're going to have to involve the police. You'll need to give a statement, and we'll need your permission to proceed with further tests." Olivia nodded absently, still in shock. The police? Of course. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a crime. She had almost been the victim of something far worse than she had imagined. And now the truth was coming to light, piece by piece. As Dr. Patel left, Olivia was left alone again, the weight of everything pressing down on her. Her thoughts were a jumbled mess. Ian was in the hospital, sedated, but he had tried to kill her. The man she had trusted had plotted her destruction. And as she sat there, surrounded by the sterile, clinical atmosphere of the hospital, Olivia realized that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Detective Rogers. "The police are on their way. We'll need you to come in for a statement as soon as possible. We've also secured the security footage from the restaurant. This is serious." Olivia's stomach turned. This was no longer just a personal betrayal. It was a criminal act. Ian had crossed a line that couldn't be undone. And now, Olivia would have to confront the reality of what he had done, not just to her, but to the life they had built together. The rest of the night passed in a blur. The hospital room was cold and unfeeling as Olivia watched Ian's body on the bed, his face pale and motionless. He looked so different from the man she had married, so fragile and small. The towering figure she had once trusted was now just a shell, and Olivia had no idea what came next. But one thing was clear. This was just the beginning, and she would not let Ian's lies define her any longer. She had already survived the worst. Now it was time to rebuild, to reclaim the life she had lost. Olivia's world had flipped in a way she could never have anticipated. The hospital had become the unexpected backdrop to the unraveling of her marriage, and now, sitting in a small, cramped room at the police station, she could feel the weight of everything crashing down on her. Ian's collapse was no longer just a private disaster. It was public knowledge, and the city was beginning to buzz with rumors. Olivia's name, once associated with success and admiration, was now tainted by the revelation that her husband had tried to poison her. The thought still felt unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But reality had set in, and she had no choice but to face the consequences head-on. Detective Carla Rogers sat across from Olivia, her eyes steady and observant, her notepad in hand. Olivia's hands were clenched together, her fingers white with tension. She had already provided a statement, recounting Sarah's warning and the glass swap, but now, with the reality of Ian's betrayal settling heavily on her, Olivia couldn't help but feel the rawness of the situation. Her life was in pieces, and there was no going back. "We've secured the footage from the restaurant," Detective Rogers said, her voice calm but firm. It's clear Ian tampered with your drink. We've also spoken to the waiter, Sarah. She gave a statement, said she saw him put something in your wine while clearing a table nearby. Olivia nodded silently, her chest tightening as she listened. Sarah's actions had saved her life. Without Sarah's warning, she could have been the one lying in a hospital bed, unconscious, or worse. Olivia had trusted Ian, believed in him, loved him. And now she was learning that her entire foundation had been built on lies. The man she had been married to was a stranger, and the facade they had built together was shattered. The footage matches Sarah's statement, Rogers continued. Ian was seen slipping powder into your glass. We're running tests on the glass for traces of diazepam, but this confirms everything. What Ian tried to do wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. He poisoned you. The weight of the words hit Olivia like a slap to the face. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was an attempt on her life. The realization was too much for her to fully comprehend. She had known something was off, sensed the distance between her and Ian, but to hear it laid out so clearly, it felt like a punch to her gut. The trust she had placed in him had been nothing but an illusion. Rogers paused for a moment, looking at Olivia with a softer expression. You did the right thing by switching the glasses, Olivia. That likely saved your life, but we need to dig deeper into Ian's motives. This wasn't just about poisoning you. There's something more here, something bigger. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She had known there had been financial trouble. Small hints of it had slipped through over the past few months, but she hadn't fully understood the extent of Ian's desperation. His lies, his evasiveness, his sudden changes in behavior, all of it pointed to one thing. Ian was in trouble. But now, as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that his debts had pushed him to the brink. His investments had failed, his company was spiraling, and his only way out was through her. Ian's firm, Olivia began, her voice steady but thick with emotion. It's been failing. I heard whispers about it from his colleagues. I think he was planning to use me, to use my firm, my assets, to save himself. His ambition was never just about success. It was about domination. Rogers nodded, her expression darkening. That's exactly what we're looking into. We're pulling his financial records, tracking his movements, and trying to find out how deep this goes. The thing is, his plan wasn't just about taking your life. It was about taking everything you've worked for, your wealth, your future. He was going to declare you unfit to manage your affairs, to take control of your assets. We're looking at fraud, conspiracy, and possibly worse. Olivia's mind reeled. She had spent years building her business, fighting to create something that mattered. She had worked tirelessly to be successful, to make a name for herself in the consulting world. But Ian had always been in the background, a constant presence. She had trusted him. They had built a life together, a life that was now being ripped apart by his lies and greed. His debts had put them both in jeopardy, but instead of seeking help, Ian had turned on her. He had chosen to betray her, to sacrifice everything they had built for the sake of his own survival. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. A uniformed officer entered, holding a folder in his hands. He handed it to Detective Rogers, who flipped through the papers inside. Her eyes narrowed as she read through the documents. "This is it," Rogers said, her voice hardening. "These are the forged documents. Medical reports stating that you had early-onset dementia, legal papers preparing for guardianship over your assets. Ian was going to use these to claim your wealth and control your life. This was all part of the plan. Olivia's heart sank. The papers, the lies. It was all so calculated. Ian had been planning this for months, maybe even longer. He had seen her as a means to an end, a way to escape his financial ruin. And now, she was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. "We'll need to file charges," Rogers continued. "Attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, all of it. The evidence is overwhelming. But we also need to protect your assets. Your firm, your money, everything is at risk. We'll work with your lawyer to freeze accounts, secure your funds, and make sure Ian can't touch anything." Olivia nodded, her mind already racing with plans for the future. She had no choice now but to fight. She had to protect everything she had worked for. She couldn't let Ian destroy her, and she wouldn't let him take her future. As the conversation moved on, Olivia's thoughts kept returning to one thing: Sarah, the young waitress who had risked everything to warn her. Sarah's bravery had saved her life, but Olivia owed her so much more. She had to find a way to thank Sarah, to repay the debt she could never fully pay back. But for now, her focus was clear. Ian would pay for what he had done. She wouldn't let him win. When the meeting with Detective Rogers ended, Olivia stepped out of the station with a sense of purpose. The fight was just beginning, and Olivia was ready. Ian might have tried to destroy her, but she was stronger than he could ever imagine. She would rebuild, reclaim her life, and make sure Ian's betrayal was never forgotten. The months following Ian's arrest had been a whirlwind of legal battles, media frenzy, and public scrutiny. Olivia's life, once marked by the stability of her marriage and her thriving business, had been turned upside down. She had filed for divorce, secured her assets, and cut all ties with Ian. But there was still one question that lingered in her mind. The one that had been gnawing at her since that fateful night at the Pinnacle restaurant. Why did Sarah risk everything to help me? Sarah, the waitress who had saved Olivia's life by warning her of Ian's poison plot, had never asked for anything in return. Olivia knew she owed Sarah more than words could express, but what made Sarah act so selflessly? Why had she risked her job, her safety, to warn a complete stranger about the man who had been her husband for 10 years? Olivia hadn't had the chance to thank Sarah properly. Their only interaction had been fleeting, hurried, and clouded by the chaos of that night. The glass swap, Ian's collapse, and the rush to get him to the hospital. Olivia was consumed by the overwhelming shock of it all, and by the time the dust had settled, Sarah had disappeared from the scene, leaving Olivia with a debt she wasn't sure how to repay. But now, with Ian's trial behind her and her life beginning to find some semblance of normalcy, Olivia knew she had to find Sarah and express her gratitude. She needed to know why Sarah had done what she had. So, Olivia took the first step and reached out. The message she sent was simple, yet meaningful. "Sarah, it's Olivia Harper. I owe you more than I can say. Can we meet? I'd like to thank you properly. Coffee? My treat." To Olivia's surprise, Sarah responded quickly. They agreed to meet at a riverside cafe on a Saturday morning. As the day drew closer, Olivia felt a mix of emotions: anticipation, gratitude, and a deep sense of curiosity. What had driven Sarah to take such a huge risk? And what was her life really like? On the morning of their meeting, Olivia arrived early. The cafe was a cozy, quiet place, nestled by the river, with a view of the city skyline. It was peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos Olivia had endured in recent months. She ordered a latte and sat down at a table outside, waiting. The air was cool, the sunlight filtering through the leaves of the nearby trees. Olivia's thoughts wandered, but she kept coming back to Sarah. It wasn't long before she saw Sarah walking toward her. She was dressed casually in a sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her smile was warm as she approached. There was something about her presence that felt grounded, like someone who had made peace with the world around her. Olivia stood up to greet her, and they exchanged a brief, friendly hug before sitting down. "Olivia," Sarah said, her voice light. "It's good to see you. I'm glad you're doing okay." Olivia smiled, grateful for the chance to finally sit down with Sarah. "I owe you everything. I don't know how to thank you enough for what you did. You saved my life." Sarah shrugged, a simple, nonchalant gesture that made Olivia pause. "It wasn't a big deal," she said, her tone humble. "I saw something and I did what felt right. I couldn't just ignore it, you know?" Olivia nodded, but her mind was already racing. It wasn't a big deal. Sarah had risked her job, her safety, possibly even her future by stepping in. She could have just looked the other way, but instead, she chose to act. Olivia felt a pang of guilt mixed with awe. "But it was a big deal," Olivia said softly. "I don't know if you realize how much it meant to me." Sarah met her gaze, her eyes bright and sincere. "I don't need any thanks," she said, her smile calm and reassuring. "It's just what people do when they see someone in trouble. Right? I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I just saw a woman who needed help." Olivia was taken aback by Sarah's simple answer. She had expected to hear something more elaborate, something that explained Sarah's bravery. But instead, Sarah's response was grounded in kindness, humility, and a clear understanding of what it meant to do the right thing. "You're amazing," Olivia said, her voice filled with admiration. "I wish more people were like you." Sarah smiled but then seemed to shift, as though contemplating something she hadn't shared yet. "You're not the only one who's been through a lot," Sarah said quietly. "I've had my share of struggles too. But I don't let it define me. I've learned to just live." She paused, her fingers lightly tapping the side of her coffee cup. "I don't need more than what I have. I've got a good job, a small apartment, and a family that I care about. That's enough for me." Olivia listened intently, her heart softening with each word. Sarah's life, as it turned out, was far from glamorous. She wasn't chasing fame or fortune, but rather a quiet, contented existence. She didn't need the trappings of success that had once consumed Olivia and Ian. Sarah's world was simple, yet full of love and purpose. She had a boyfriend named Jake, who worked as a mechanic, and she spent her weekends helping her grandmother on their family farm up north. "It's a simple life," Sarah said, her eyes reflecting a quiet peace. "But it's my life, and I'm happy with it." Olivia felt a mixture of emotions, envy, admiration, and a deep sense of respect. She had spent so many years pursuing success, only to find herself lost in a web of ambition and betrayal. Sarah, on the other hand, had chosen to live simply, and yet her life seemed richer, more fulfilling than Olivia's ever had been. Olivia couldn't help but wonder if she had been chasing the wrong things all these years. The conversation turned to the night at the Pinnacle, and Sarah shared what had been going through her mind when she saw Ian tampering with Olivia's drink. "I wasn't sure what he was doing at first," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But when I realized what was happening, I couldn't just walk away. I had to say something." Olivia felt her gratitude deepen. Sarah had been so sure in her decision to act, so brave in the face of the unknown. "You saved me," Olivia repeated, her voice thick with emotion. Sarah smiled again, her expression warm. "You're welcome, Olivia. But I didn't do it for any reward. I did it because it was the right thing to do." As they parted ways, Olivia couldn't help but feel a profound shift within herself. Sarah had given her more than just her life. She had given her perspective. Olivia had spent so long focused on climbing the ladder of success, but Sarah had shown her that there was another way to live, a way that didn't rely on ambition and material wealth. For the first time in years, Olivia felt truly free. Olivia sat in the quiet of her cottage, the soft hum of spring filling the air through the open windows. The room around her was simple, a contrast to the sleek, polished surfaces of the downtown condo she had once shared with Ian. She had sold the condo, packed up the remnants of her old life, and now, in this small, peaceful haven, she was starting to breathe again. She could still feel the weight of the past, the betrayal, the pain, the lies, but it was different now. It no longer controlled her. She had reclaimed her life. The walls of the cottage were bare, save for a few sketches she had drawn during her quiet moments, capturing the landscapes and scenes she had seen during her travels. Painting, something she had never thought she would be interested in, had become a form of therapy. Each stroke of the brush was like reclaiming a piece of herself she had long neglected, a part of her that had been lost in the chaos of ambition and survival. In these moments, when the world outside was still, Olivia could finally hear her own thoughts, clear and uninterrupted. Her phone buzzed on the small wooden table beside her, but she ignored it. She had learned to distance herself from the constant pressure of work, from the frantic pace of her old life. The messages could wait. Today, she had decided, was for her. It was time to embrace the life she had been too afraid to live before. One that wasn't centered around success and status, but around peace and fulfillment. She had spent weeks adjusting to this new pace, allowing herself to slow down and enjoy the simplicity of life. No more late-night calls, no more board meetings that dragged on endlessly, no more pretending to be the perfect wife, the perfect businesswoman. Now she was just Olivia, a woman reclaiming her happiness. Her thoughts drifted back to Sarah, the woman who had saved her life. Since their meeting, Olivia had spent countless hours reflecting on their conversation, trying to understand the kind of person Sarah was. She had lived a life so different from Olivia's, yet there was a wisdom in Sarah's simplicity that Olivia had never seen before. Sarah had no grand ambitions, no desire for wealth or power. She was content with what she had, her family, her job, and the small, meaningful life she had built. Olivia admired that so much. It was something she had never allowed herself to pursue, always too focused on climbing higher, achieving more, and proving herself. Now, Olivia could see the value in Sarah's way of living. Sarah had taught her a valuable lesson, not just about gratitude and kindness, but about the importance of simplicity. Olivia had spent so many years chasing after a version of success that was defined by external achievements and material wealth. In the process, she had lost sight of what truly mattered. Sarah had reminded her that life didn't have to be complicated. It didn't have to be about bigger and better. It could be about living authentically and with intention. With these realizations came a wave of clarity. Olivia knew that she needed to step away from the firm she had built. She had given everything to Harper Consulting, but now it was time to let go. The firm could run without her. She had built a strong team that could carry on without her constant presence. For the first time in years, Olivia felt no guilt in stepping away. It was time to put herself first. Her decision to leave wasn't born out of anger or bitterness toward the firm or her colleagues. It was simply the realization that she needed a different path, one that was no longer dictated by external pressures or her past mistakes. She had to step away from the business world and explore what truly fulfilled her. She had spent years being someone she wasn't, living a life she had never truly chosen for herself. Now, it was time to live on her own terms. Olivia packed a small bag with just the essentials and left the cottage to take a walk down the nearby path that led through the rolling fields. The soft green of the grass, the scent of fresh earth, and the wide open sky made her feel small and insignificant in the best way possible. Here, in this vast, untouched landscape, she felt free. It was a freedom she had never known in the city, where every corner seemed to hold a reminder of the life she had built with Ian, a life that had ultimately been a lie. As she walked, Olivia realized that she wasn't just physically leaving her past behind. She was emotionally detaching from the life that had caused her so much pain. She wasn't the same woman who had entered that restaurant months ago, naive and trusting. She wasn't the woman who had clung to the idea of a perfect marriage, unwilling to see the cracks. The betrayal had changed her, but it had also set her free. It had given her the chance to start over, to rebuild from the ground up. That afternoon, Olivia sat in a small cafe by the river, enjoying a cup of coffee and a quiet moment to herself. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind, but now she was taking it slow. She had started to make plans, but they weren't about building her career or increasing her wealth. They were about living authentically, connecting with the people who mattered, and exploring the things that made her truly happy. As she looked out over the river, she thought of Sarah again. Sarah had been the catalyst for this change in her. Life. It was Sarah's courage, her unwavering sense of right and wrong, that had set Olivia on this path. Sarah had seen something in her that Olivia had been too blind to see herself. Sarah had given Olivia the greatest gift, freedom. Olivia's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Diane, her lawyer. "The divorce papers are finalized. Ian is out of your life for good. You're free to move forward." Olivia smiled, a sense of peace washing over her. This was it, the final step. She was free. With a deep breath, Olivia put her phone away and smiled. She was ready to begin again, to live a life that was hers to create. And this time, it would be on her terms. The journey was just beginning.